because of this more increasingly specialist nature of provision and the higher levels of need of children, whether it's actually realistic for local authorities to cultivate a market, for want of a better way of describing it, that can meet all those needs in their local patch, in their local area, whether that's realistic within the kind of like the budget envelope they currently work with, whether it's desirable. I mean, obviously, I think there's strong arguments potentially from a children's well-being point of view to be as local to home as possible in most instances. But I suppose really, is it realistic and is it desirable from a local authority's point of view? Would it not make more sense to have a kind of a broader range of specialist providers in a wider geographical area to be able to choose from? Johnathan,
we don't know, and that's the wonderful and awful position we're in. We actually don't know whether that is the case, because we assume that might be the case, and we assume there might be the numbers to make or the provision viable locally, but actually we don't have the data which will provide us with the service security to say that this is the case. It's never been the case in history that we've been able to provide things locally and regionally. So there's always had to be some national, but we don't know how many places or what they might be to be provided nationally, regionally or locally. So in order for us to have a sensible debate and an informed debate, we've got to have the data, which means a collaboration of all the local authorities and the government in getting us all of that detailed, granular data, and not just the titles we have at the moment, but really getting down into some specific needs, like in the Nuffield Family Justice Observatory report, where it looks at 65 different needs, and some of the young people going to the Dolls Court have 4+ co-occurring needs. We need that sort of granularity to make sense of this discussion about local, regional, and national. If it comes out of that this is what we achieve through this proposal of regional care co-ops, we'll have made a big step forward. But let's make the big step forward first.
Harvey, from a foster care point of view, is that something you agree with? I mean, I imagine it's a slightly different kind of landscape in terms of how IFAs work compared to residential care, but it's the same kind of questions about local, national, regional that Johnathan has just described. Does that apply for foster care as well?
Well, it does, because as the question I posed a minute ago, we've got this chaos of children going all over the place for no apparent reason. It's certainly not the primary reason being what do they need, and how do we understand what their needs are. Assessment is a problem, and as Johnathan described as well, aggregation of robust like-for-like data is virtually impossible. And it always perplexes me that on the one hand, you have a statutory care system that assesses children, comes up with a care plan, has an IRO who does their annual review, and essentially that, it seems to me, is how a local authority knows whether that child is progressing in their care and how government can hold them to account. Yet none of that is applied to choice of placement or how well children are doing in their foster care placement, their children's homes. We have these two parallel systems operating at the same time, and the first one isn't in a fit state to meet the needs that Johnathan's described, but neither is the second one. So what that means is it's all a lastminute.com system. We need a foster carer for this child. We can give you a bit of information about it, but the assessment's not robust across all of them. They're not necessarily quality assured in the same sort of way. So even at an individual level, it's very difficult to understand the needs of a child who is being presented to an IFA, whichever local authority that comes from.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the discussion about sufficiency there. I know we've only scratched the surface on it. I was going to move on to the efficiency element of this, which of course kind of essentially involves money and at the kind of one of the core tenets of the Competitions and Markets Authority review of children's social care and the independent review of children's social care final report was this notion and this idea that, backed up with some evidence, that some larger private and independent providers are making excessive profits. Now, and of course, the government's responded to that by essentially saying that regional commissioning will create economies of scale that will essentially drive down the cost to local authorities. I know, so it's a very simplified way of describing it, but in essence, I think that's where they're coming from with it. Is that realistic in this current climate, with this current level of need that children have, with this current shortage of providers? Johnathan, what do you think? Is that something that you think would happen if we moved to regional commissioning?
So
a little bit of crystal ball gazing there, but
yeah, you mean the control of prices?
Yeah.
I think that's unlikely, given the political pronouncements of both of the leading political parties at the moment, that they don't seem to want to control prices in some ways. I think it's incredibly difficult. And it's incredibly difficult, I think, because we've got some very large providers now. And control of prices pushes us towards thinking about things in terms of unit costs and of bulk buy, as Leonie said, of identical products. And children's placements don't come like that. That's one of the reasons why spot purchase has burgeoned so much. It comes with a sort of a strategic supplier relationship management approach, and it certainly would benefit the private equity providers, and this is like perverse and contradictory to the sorts of thinking which both the CMA and the care review put forward. But it will benefit those who can, and it would disadvantage the smaller providers. It also tends to misunderstand the different sorts of providers we have. Private equity investors come into public care for a different reason than those who are individuals or families or others. And it all becomes a much more complicated discussion than just being about the profit. I can appreciate people want to come to a simplistic answer, but I think there is a much more sophisticated understanding that's needed about economies and economics before we can really get into that sort of thinking.
And also, I think there's an additional problem here that at present, because purchasing is on such a random and spot basis, I know it's not totally random, but sometimes it feels random, the management of the relationship between the provider and the local authority is not necessarily based on a relationship that is looking at, well, if we purchase a particular service for this child, what can you give us in return from fee increase by way of a better service from staffing perspective? So I don't see in many of the contracts that I've seen a specific relationship between what is being paid and what is being delivered. If it's based on, oh my goodness, I need a place, then it is based on urgency. If it's based on, well, actually, if we join with you and we offer you a longer contract, then you can use some of that guarantee and some of the guarantee purchase funds to actually go out, recruit staff, offer them training, etc., etc. But do we know how far these organizations with which are said to have excessive profit are ever discussing any of this with their parent local authorities in a mature way. What are we getting? Why are we paying all this extra? Is it really such a large profit? What are you investing back in the service? What are you investing back in the business? Are you telling us how much you're investing? Or is our cost base different to a different cost base? Or is it simply that they are able to deliver a large profit because they're opportunistic in the free market economy? And to pick up on so much of what we've been saying today, there are some really fundamental questions that we actually have no answers to, because the CMA acknowledged in their report that the information that they got on profit was partial. It's not complete. And it is possible that if you look at the market as a whole, it isn't accurate in terms of numbers of providers. It may be accurate in terms of number of places because the bigger providers offer more places. But I don't really think we know. And what are we defining profit by?
Is there a suspicion in that then that in the absence, I'm not sure if there is any actual evidence out there to support this, but is the suspicion then that actually a lot of the what we're classing as excessive profit making could be linked to perhaps the nature of the spot purchasing market and practices that kind of dominate the way care placements are commissioned and procured? Do you think that might be a key factor in this? Because it kind of stands to reason, I suppose, that if you're purchasing on the hurry up or in an emergency, then you're probably going to be paying more than if you're doing long-term forecasting over 5-10 years. And of course, that's very difficult to do.
Exactly. And also, if a local authority is ringing round to find a place, they're not planning for that child on a planned basis. What does this child need in a few months' time? How can we deliver that? How can we deliver a pathway to perhaps something more intensive for 3 or 4 weeks, and then a pathway out from something very intensive to something less intensive? Because we have these relationship streams. And secondly, to pick up on that, if you're in a spot relationship, then you don't look at quality assurance in the same way. You don't look at a structure of quality outcomes. You're not looking necessarily, and I bow to probably Johnathan and Harvey know more about this than I do. The providers are saying, no, we don't think we can meet the needs of this child, or we think we can meet the needs of this child. If you look at breakdown of places, why do they break down? It's a very inefficient way of delivering a marketplace. And you use that term deliberately because it is a market, it's a commercial market, but it isn't very efficient.
Harvey, you were nodding
along
there. Is that similar experience?
Yeah, there's a few things. You sparked a thought off with me there, Darren, when you talked about you might pay something more if you need it in a hurry. The issue is that the CMA only considered fee levels and didn't consider quality, the needs of children, or the investment in the service. So it was a very, very partial look at what's being provided, and they're not the same things. The fact is, by and large, 93% of independent fostering agencies are good or outstanding with Ofsted. Most of them make a profit. Most of them offer really good value for money. And when we look at all those studies that there are out there about the relative costs of a local authority's own directly delivered service as opposed to IFAs, they actually compare very well. Martin Airy said the difference wasn't so much as that you should be making decisions based on the differential. So actually, I would completely turn it around. If I'm a local authority delivering fostering services and I'm looking out and saying, how come those guys can make a profit yet do it better than me for equal value for money? What am I doing wrong? That's the question they should be asking themselves.
Can I just raise that? I think what your question raises to Derren is our gaze has been averted from something, and that if we want the right place and for the right child at the right time, one of the ways to be able to do that is for local authorities to open up more homes and of their own, which are particularly to meet particular needs, probably of low incidence needs, maybe more specialist. But the expansion of the local authority owns homes is too few and it's too slow. And if that is what is needed, then we need to be able to say to government, you need to fund these people at the local authorities much more for particular and not in the way of making a bid, which it is now, but to actually have a strategic plan to build and open more local authority homes. But we're not at that level. And we've averted our gaze from thinking about, we've had our gaze averted from thinking about care as a social service. And it's now become a financial transaction. Well, some of the solutions are in government and national and local, their own hands. It's a challenge back.
You're absolutely right. Of course, it has. We've written a number of articles about local authorities and collectives of local authorities as well that are looking to develop in-house provision, for a better way of describing it. That's
been the case for a long time, Derren, though, hasn't it?
That's
so
right. Yeah.
I wait to see the fruition of decades worth of trying to do that.
Yeah.
And also.
And also, I just wanted to just mention it as we kind of move towards the end of our conversation. There's one other thing I wanted to raise in the context of that, and that was the recent Association of Directors of Children's Services consultation, policy paper, position paper on commissioning, recently kind of, I think, focused on increasing the role of the voluntary sector in this. And seeing that as something that was perhaps missing currently in the solutions. Do you think that would, I don't know, opening up to the floor here, but do you think that's something that is welcome and that would actually is part of the solution as well?
There's nothing stopping the voluntary sector choosing to be in or out of this marketplace. The reality is that because many of them are charities, most of them are charities, they have to make their commercial business decisions on charitable lines. And many of them have chosen not to be in this market and have chosen not to invest capital in this market. We need to understand why. To say we want to encourage them to get back into building and developing and growing their foster services, we need to understand why they walked away and why they're not prepared to be in this place at present. And
dare I say, sorry to interrupt, but implicit in that, dare I say, is a risks too high, returns too low? Is that potentially the reason?
I don't know. I mean, I would look at risk. I think risk is a really big factor, and risk is a really big factor for why local authorities don't choose to be in this market. And just a comment I would like to add here, which hasn't come out. The CMA made the point that it couldn't evidence that residential care delivered by local authorities in-house is any cheaper. If that is the case, then why are we focusing all the time on massive, great profits made by the private sector? Is there, as to add to what Harvey has said, is there really any evidence to prove that? And I think to really come back to where we've been talking all the way through this, what does the evidence show? And where we don't have evidence, please can we have some evidence-based information before we start turning care up on its head in this way?
Thank you.
I think for...
Sorry, Harvey Cowan.
No, for me, it's just a clear question of priorities in terms of who delivers the services. The single most important thing is this child going to get what they need from this service? And that overrides every other consideration. Second consideration is it value for money for the public purse? And you'll get that if the first box is ticked. Then there's no evidence that any particular structure or governance of organisation can do any of the first two better than any other.
Okay.
Agreed.
Johnathan.
There was something which is, again is avoided really, insofar as voluntary organisations haven't, as Leonie has said, haven't been involved in residential childcare as a generalisation. There are some who are very good and some have had a long and honourable history of providing residential childcare. But many of the larger providers, and which will be in people's heads, they haven't been involved in it. So the question is, can we be assured of everybody, whether they're private, voluntary, or they're local authority, that they have the knowledge and the experience and the expertise and can develop their workforce and they've got the leadership to actually do what they say they're going to do? The other bit which I think is avoided in the discussion around voluntary organisations, they have different terms of conditions and different pay scales than the local authority. So if the local authority, for example, commissions a voluntary organisation to provide the services, whose pay terms and conditions are they going to pay on? The voluntary organisations or the? I think that the in discussion around voluntary organisations, we've hit upon something which we have not yet discussed. We talk about providers, we talk about purchasers, but we don't talk about the practitioners, and we don't talk about the pay and the terms and conditions. And we talk about recruitment crisis in residential care particularly, but we don't talk about why there's a recruitment crisis. And part of that is it's a low pay sector, and that's being avoided in the discussion about providers. We need to talk about providers, practitioners and pay.
So we posed the question at the beginning, will regional commissioning improve sufficiency and efficiency of care placements? I think it's fair to say that it's the answer is jury's out. Because
is my answer.
Yeah. I think we've only scratched the surface there, and I know we could absolutely carry on and go down a number of different avenues, but we've been speaking for 45 minutes and that has flown by. Thank you, all of you, for your contributions. I very much appreciate it, and hopefully it'll stimulate debate and discussion, when it's out there.